Warm welcome to all of you. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, based on wherever you are. So, this webinar is going to be conducted by me and Sunita. I'm going to be the main host. Sunita is also going to pitch in. We're going to solve some questions today. But this webinar is basically going to focus on helping you not just solve few questions, but helping you understand how to solve any 700 level verbal question. What is the key difference that actually takes you across the line? Okay, so this is going to be an interesting webinar, and why this is going to be an interesting webinar is simply because of me. Okay, so I just praise my own self, but not in that sense. I mean to say that this webinar is going to be interesting because you're going to hear from someone who actually went from being a struggler in verbal, a big time struggler in verbal. In fact, if I go back and recall my first ever verbal test that I took, first ever verbal test, I scored a 13% on the test. It was that bad. Trust me, guys, it was that bad. I was shaken. I had no clue what was happening. I kind of marked a good number of questions. I felt that they are correct, but somehow the score flashed at 13%. I struggled big time. I prepared for verbal for a lot of time, and my scores always fluctuated between 25 to 70%. Some days I was lucky. I got a 70%. I even remember some days I could get a 85, 90 as well. But the range was so broad. I was getting 75% some days 70%. It was a real mess, guys. It was a real mess. I was in a big I was facing a lot of trouble with verbal, but once I found what it takes to get a 700 level question correct, I could actually apply it and improve my verbal score to a 41, which was 93 percentile. And by virtue of it, in my first attempt on GMAT itself, I was able to score a 740. So that's why this webinar is gonna be interesting, because you're gonna hear from someone who has who has been a big time struggler and has improved his score significantly. So bear with me, be with me here, and you're gonna learn a lot of things in this webinar today. So a few questions, and I'm so happy to see all of you. Rafael, Dhirendra, Atul, a very warm welcome to this webinar. And Isha, we record all our webinars, and they will be definitely shared on YouTube. You will get the recordings on YouTube on this Monday or Tuesday. So just make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, and you will be able to see the webinar recordings popping up on your notifications bar. Okay, so you will get the recordings in case you're not able to attend the entire session. So Indranil, I can understand. I can understand all the pains that a student goes through, and that's something which I'm gonna just talk about now. So some of the most common concerns, and I would rather let's do a very quick survey from the batch. Let's understand where you guys are right now in terms of your verbal performance. So I've given some broad ranges over here. So feel free to let me know in this poll where exactly are you at present in terms of your verbal performance. That will actually give me a good idea about your current skill level overall. Okay, I see some votes. Okay, good. And this is an important question, so please make sure that you respond to this one. Okay. Hi Samyak, and good morning or good evening, Bindu. Hi Ashwin, happy to see you here. Okay, great. So I still see a few people polling in. Okay. All right. So let me now end the poll, because I see that it has more or less stabilized now. So I see almost about half of the batch, about 43% of you are in the range of 21 to 25, and more than half are below the range of 25. A good number of you are in the range of 26 to 30. A good number of you are in the range of 31 to 35 as well, and very few of you are in the range of 36 to 38. So I'll tell you how I read this course, and that's one of the reasons why I asked you to tell me this. Any score which is less than 20 actually signifies a lot of concept gaps. There are many concept gaps. In fact, even I would say till 25, anything less than 25, there are conceptual gaps, if not in all three areas, SCCR or RC, at least in a couple of them. Okay, but there are definitely a lot of concept gaps that exist. if your score is around 26 to 30, what it basically means is you are good in one area. There is one area out of SCCR and RC that you generally do well on. But when it comes to the other areas, there are significant issues, but the issues are not really related to concepts as such. They are more application driven in nature. However, if your score is between 31 to 35, you're probably good in two areas and you just need to work on one area where your problem is the application. And that is something which I'm going to talk about today in depth. And anything beyond it basically means there are just fine tuning required on the application. So that's basically how I look at the scores. And I see a lot of people in the bracket of less than 25. So don't worry, doesn't matter which bracket you are on. In basically right now, I'll help you understand why are you in that bracket, what is that which is basically lacking in your performance, and how can you improve on those areas as well. Okay, so some common concerns which I had when I was a student, and feel free to say yay or nay in if you also face this issues in your day-to-day prep. I always get stuck with two close choices in the end. When I was struggling with verbal, that was the case with me. I used to get stuck with two close choices many a times in verbal, many a times. I could eliminate two choices or three choices, but those two close choices actually were a big trouble for me to eliminate. Both of them seemed correct. I sometimes felt that if I was given more time on the question on this on the test rather, I could still solve it. I could get it right, but I can't solve it in just 2 minutes. And this is something which I felt probably more for RC than anything else. But that's what the feeling I had, that if I had more time without like there was no time limit, that then probably I can solve the question. But it's impossible for me to solve it in 2 minutes. I also, again, this is something which I hear. I personally did not face it that much, but I hear students saying that I get 80% plus during my practice on OG, but my scores in mocks is not so great. I don't know why that happens. Okay, some of them tell me this. So yeah, this is another problem. Another issue, and very common issue, in fact a lot of people will agree with this. I've studied everything, I completed everything, whatever is possible. I learned all the rules, revised all the rules, did tons of questions, but I'm not still not able to break the V30 mark. I don't know why. I'm unable to improve my performance any further. I feel like I have hit a plateau in my performance. Okay, and Bindu says that yeah, I also struggle with two choices. Asha says that yes, I face some of these issues as well. Okay, so Nilab, I'm definitely going to talk about RC. Don't worry, we are going to talk about SC, CR, and RC, all three areas today. It's going to help you understand the core problems that the core problem behind all these things. Okay, so another thing which is related to RC, again, Nilab, you might also face this issue, is I struggle with unfamiliar genres such as social sciences, philosophy, or economics. Again, it could be different for different people, but for me, social sciences or philosophy was something which I could not relate to at all. When there was a passage on it, I generally get most of the things. I used to generally get most of the things wrong, and all these things I faced as a student myself, like most of this at least. So these are the most common concerns that we face, and we are gonna help you understand. I'm gonna answer all the questions around these common concerns. How can you actually get rid of them? So what we are going to learn today is we are going to first start with identifying the core problem. What is the core reason why you are stuck with this problems right now? Then we will talk about what is the solution to overcome the score plateau. So we'll talk about the problem, then we'll talk about the solution, that okay, how do I go about overcoming the score plateau? Okay, then we are going to help you understand, once you know the solution, it'll help you understand how do you master the solution. Okay, so first we identify the problem, then we talk about the solution, then we help you understand how do you master the solution and build a study strategy around it to be able to get to a 40 plus kind of a score. And in the end, I'll open it up for an open-ended Q&A where you can interact with me, ask any other questions that you might have around the same, and I'll be happy to take them up. Okay, so are you all excited to get started, guys? Let me quickly ask you a yes or no here. Are you all excited to get started and see what is the core problem? And trust me, guys, I want you to be very open-minded. Like, try and relate to what I'm saying. Try to listen to the things that I'm saying with the open mind. Try to understand the nitty-gritties of the entire thing, because trust me, all of us feel that there is something big which is going wrong. The problem is it's not that big an issue. It's these are the smaller things is what actually creates more of a problem for people. Okay, so I see almost everyone is excited except one person. So I'm so sorry I couldn't actually provide a solution till now. But be with me. You're gonna learn a lot about the core problem in the webinar. Okay, so Ashwin has a question. I guess today is the last webinar in this webinar series. Yes, Ashwin, we were running a webinar series. For those of you who don't know it, we were running a webinar series of 20 webinars, basically for which started on June 20th. It ends today. So that's today's last webinar in the webinar series. We will organize more webinars and we will share the details with you. So yeah, so that today's last webinar series, and all of you can actually check out the previous recordings of the webinar series in case you haven't done so. There are really good topics that we have covered in the webinar. So you can actually go through the section recordings. I'm just going to share the link over here. And I would strongly recommend you to register, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can actually get notifications of the upcoming sessions as well. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about the core problem. Okay, why do most people struggle with verbal? And what better than an official question to understand the core problem? Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this question, solve this question at your end, and then we will talk about the core problem that happens. Okay, so I'm gonna show you the poll and I'm gonna mute myself for a couple of minutes, and you will solve this question and then I'll unmute myself. So all the best, guys. All right, guys. So I'm gonna end the poll now. I see most of you have responded already. So last 10 seconds if you want to respond to it. Okay, great, guys. So I'm ending the poll now, and I want to know how was this question, guys? Like, you can tell me in the chat here. Was it simple, difficult? What are your observations from this question? Okay, let's see what you guys think about this question in the chat here. And in the meantime, I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna do with this fun. So Razdi found this question easy. Okay, that's good, Razdi. I'm happy to know that you found it easy. Sam says it was a good test on modifiers. Okay, Somak, that's good. Participle modifier is what Deepak says. Tatwa says parallelism didn't make sense grammatically. Nabia says easy, meaning issue more than tense. Okay, Nabia, good point. All right, so good. Right, I'm happy to see your responses, guys. Here, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna solve this question in two phases. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you how old Piyush. When I say old Piyush, I mean the Piyush who, if you remember, who got a 13% score in his first ever verbal test. Okay, I'm gonna solve this question how old Piyush would have approached it first. Firstly, I'll do that. Okay, intentionally, I'll do that to help you understand what was wrong with my approach earlier, and then I'll actually solve this question once again using the approach that I follow now. Okay, and while I'm doing both of them, I'm gonna read out aloud. I'm gonna solve this question as if I'm doing it for the first time. Okay, so understand the intent. The intent is simple. I want you to understand the difference between the change that I had in my thought process, and how that changed helped me improve my score. Okay, so let's get started. Let me tell you how I would have read this question in my in my earlier days. Okay, how would I have actually approached it? So let's get started with that. So scientists have recently discovered what could be the largest and oldest living organism on Earth, a giant fungus that is an interwoven filigree of mushrooms and root-like tentacles spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago and extending for more than 30 acres in the soil of a Michigan forest. Okay, so I get a rough idea that okay, this is talking about some discovery, some fungus is there, some mushroom, some. So I'm not sure. Like it's talking about probably a fungus. So let's read that part. A fungus that is an interwoven filigree of mushrooms and root-like tentacles spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago and extending. So okay, so probably this spawned and extending are basically verbs which are relating to a giant fungus. Okay, probably that's the case. Now it sounds weird because spawns and extending, ideally it seems like it should be spawned and extended, maybe. I'm not sure, that's the underlying portion, but that's probably how I will do it, like how I used to do it very initially, very initially. So I would probably say spawned and extended looks better, sounds better, might be the case. But then I realized I learned another approach. And again, all this is done, this was done by old Piyush. I'm still not talking about new Piyush. I learned another approach, which is the splits approach. Now, I want to know how many of you know about the splits approach. Any of you want to tell what the splits approach is here? Quickly in the chat, let's see, like how many of you know about that? Let me give you 10 seconds for that. Okay. Rajiv says, I have no idea. Bindu says, fanboys. Okay. Set paragraph into segments. That's what Vinny says. Bindu says when two segments are joined, we need to use fanboys and comma. So Bindu, that's not the splits approach. That's like connection of two sentences. Okay, checking options and seeing where difference is in the underlined portion. Great, Deepak. You've actually nailed it well. So that's what the splits approach is. So when I was a student, I actually learned the splits approach, and it was like, okay, wow, this is great because it helps me save time, right? I can just look at the differences in the option choices, see what the differences are according to grammar. From the grammar perspective, I can actually make a call between what is right and what is not. That is what I thought of, like that is what I learned. And again, this is the second approach that old Piyush used. New Piyush has used a different approach, which I'll talk about later. So what I learned in the splits approach is look at the options. Look at the options from the grammar stand. Look at the options from the difference standpoint. Identify the difference that exists and look at the difference from the grammar standpoint. What makes sense, what does not make sense. Okay. Now, this question is simple because there is only one underlined portion. So I can see that there is a word extending, and in the different option choices, there are different forms of the word extending. Okay. It says extended, extends, and so on. So when I look at extends, that's simple present tense form of the same word. The same word, base word, extend is used, and we are giving a simple present tense form of the same word. Okay. Extended, on the other hand, is a simple past tense form of the same word. Okay. It extended is a simple past tense with subject. And is extending is present continuous tense form of the verb. Okay. Now, what about extending? Not sure. Looks like present continuous. I'm not sure what it was, it is, or whatever. But what I'm able to see from the splits is the point of contention here is the right tense form. Okay, it seems like that I have to find out which is the right tense form which is supposed to be used. That is the grammatical difference in the various options. And guys, I'm repeating this fact probably for the third time. There's this is not how I approach it today. This is how I used to approach it earlier. Okay, Nabia says it is a gerund verb. Deepak says it is a participle. And trust me, guys, Nabia and Deepak, I'm able to see old myself in you. I used to remember so many grammar terms, gerund, participles, and whatnot. And today it's even difficult for me to remember. But those made my life really worse because there were so many grammar rules to be remembered. Uh, I'll show you a better approach. But anyway, let's come back to what I used to solve earlier. So I look at this differences. I understand that this is about tense forms, right? Tense form. So all I need to understand is in which time frame did this event occur. If I'm able to understand the time frame, I'll be able to get to the answer. Okay. So let me read again. I have identified the split. So let me read again. So scientists have recently discovered what could be the largest and oldest living organism on Earth. Okay, a giant fungus that is an interwoven filigree of mushrooms and root-like tentacles. So it's talking about something which is true in present, spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago. So this spawned by thing has happened in the past. Obviously, it is already fertilized, so it should be in the past and extending for more than 30 acres in the soil of a Michigan forest. Now, again, I don't know, like, is if I have to say that I have to use a this looks like more of a fact that it is extending for more than 30 acres in the soil of Michigan forest. This seems more like a fact to me. And to represent fact, we generally use simple present tense. Okay. But if the extension has stopped, I'm not sure. Should I use simple past in that case? Maybe not. Not really sure. Seems like simple present is a better choice because I think this is more like a fact. I'm telling something about the fungus. I'm telling that it extends for more than 30 acres in the soil of a Michigan forest. I'm talking about that fungus. This is something which is a fact about the fungus. So maybe simple present makes more sense. But if I have think from the perspective of when did the event happen, probably it has stopped extending. So extended, but extended gives me a feeling that it might not be happening now, or the fungus is not present now. It's weird. Again, I will go for probably extends. Okay, that is probably the choice that the old Piyush would have marked in this case. And if you look at the results of the poll also, a good number of you, 22% of you have actually gone ahead with B, and a good number of you were confused with C as well. So I showed you two schools of thought. First one, who did not know about the splits approach altogether, he would have gone by what sounded right to his ear, would have marked C as the answer. When I started using the splits approach, I focused a lot on grammar. I need to identify the tense form, the right tense form, and I would have marked B as the answer. Now let me show you the data, attempt data from GMAT Club, and that will reveal a lot of things. And it's not just about the people who are here; it's about a lot of other people also, like who have attended this webinar. Okay, Sai has a question. Sorry for asking this. Are you now old Piyush or new Piyush? So Sai, I'm still solving questions as old Piyush. I'm gonna transition to that other version later on. Don't worry about that. So attempt data from GMAT Club, I'm showing 30% of people actually ended up marking choice B. So it's not just you guys. It's this data is for thousands of attempts on GMAT Club. 17% students marked C as the answer. 8% of them marked A as E as the answer because they thought that it's still extending. So probably right tense form is extending. But the correct answer is choice A. Okay. And I'm happy that good 38% of you marked that as the answer. But trust me, the approach that I used to use earlier will not have led at least me to the correct answer. Okay. Now, what is the problem with this approach? What's wrong with this approach? A lot of people use the splits approach. A lot of people focus on that. What is wrong with the splits approach? When I actually transitioned to the right approach to be followed, I realized that the core problem with the splits approach or the approach I was using or other approaches related to CR or RC that I was using earlier was most of the methods that I was following focused on one core principle. There was just one core principle behind all the methods that I used to follow, and the principle was to solve questions quickly. Okay, my focus was to solve questions quickly. Bindu, I'm going to tell you why extending is right here. Don't worry, I'm going to solve the question as new Piyush as well, so you'll get to know why it is right. Okay, don't worry about that. But the core problem with the approach is that I used to solve questions quickly. My focus was not on the logical aspect of the sentence. The idea was that timing is important. I need to save time. I need to solve the question in 2 minutes. So I need to solve it quickly. And what I used to forget in that whole process was that accuracy is more important than timing. GMAT is not gonna give me extra marks for saving time or solving questions quickly. GMAT is only going to give me extra marks for high accuracy in the right questions. So it's very important that I get the questions right. Okay, more important than the timing. But the core problem is that a lot of people focus on solving questions quickly. Okay, then timing. So Indranil is facing some issues with audio. I just want to make sure that my audio is fine. So are you guys able to hear me clearly? So sorry, but I just want to make sure that my audio is fine with all of you. Okay, so I see 100% yes. So I guess Indranil, the issue is at your end. So please check your internet connection and maybe try rejoining. That might help you. Okay, so great. So the core problem is we solve questions too quickly. We try to solve questions too quickly. That's the biggest mistake that a lot of people do when they follow the wrong approach. That's the problem with that approach. And a lot of us tell ourselves, and trust me guys, this is something which is very, very important. You have to accept this as a fact. When I was a student, I was really great at quant. I was really good at quant. I'm so sorry for praising my own self in front of all of you, but I was very confident about my quant skills. You give me a quant question, I can solve it. But when it came to verbal, I always felt that in verbal, there is always that level of subjectivity that is there. There is always a level of subjectivity that is there. There is a right answer, but there is a right answer. Maybe for some people, something else seems right. To me, something else seems right. I always felt that verbal is subjective. How many of you also trust, and please be very honest with me, how many of you feel that verbal is subjective? There could be two right answers. To me something seems right, to someone else something else might seem right. How many of you feel that? And please be very honest with me, this is a very important question, guys. How many of you feel that verbal is subjective? Okay. Okay, I'm seeing some interesting responses. We'll wait for a few more seconds, maybe 10-15 seconds, I guess. Let's see all the responses, guys. And I want all of you to respond to this poll. This is a very important question, guys. Okay, great. So let me now end the poll. And you can, the Rajdeep, I'll display the question slide. Don't worry about that. That will come again. So you can see also more than 80% of the batch, around 80% of the batch feels that verbal is subjective. And that was a single biggest mistake probably that I have done in my first phase of prep. That I told myself that the verbal is subjective. Piyush, the problem is not with you. The problem is with verbal itself. It is subjective, man. For you, according to you, this logic is right. According to someone else, that logic is right. So the moment I told myself verbal is subjective, I shut down all the possible learning that I could get from a question. I actually told myself that you have done well, man. That's not a problem. The problem is not with you. It is with the question. It is with the thing that has happened. Okay. So Bindu has actually told the definition of subjective. Yeah, subjective basically means that yes, it is based on, influenced by people's opinions, thoughts, and everything. So that's how I used to think, and trust me, that was the biggest mistake that I did. Now the good thing about GMAT is you definitely need to get out of the best choice trap. This is again very critical, guys, and this is something which I've seen some other even tutors talk about this. I feel really bad about it when they say that this is the best answer out of the 5 answers. Trust me, guys, there's no best answer on GMAT. The good thing about GMAT is there is one right answer and 4 wrong answers always. There is just one right answer. There are no gray areas whatsoever. The moment you tell yourself that okay, this is in the gray area, it seems right. It just the subjectivity which is at play. You actually shut down everything that can, like all the learnings which are possible to generate from that question. whenever you're making the wrong mistake, whenever you're stuck with two choices and you're marking the wrong answer, trust me, guys, you're making two mistakes. This is very important for you to learn. You're accepting something which is wrong, and you're at the same time missing something that is right. So GMAT gives you two chances to correct your mistakes. You need to understand why the four answers are wrong, and at the same time, you need to know why the last one is incorrect. A good number of people do one of these two things. They don't have a and over here, they have a or over here. They either find out the right answer or find out the wrong answers. They don't do both of them at the same time. The moment you start doing both of them at the same time, you focus on and, things will be much better. Trust me, guys, you will not make those mistakes. So first thing that you need to do is start believing GMAT verbal is not subjective. If a question has a particular answer, the answer is correct, and there's a proper reason behind it. Okay. So with that, I'm gonna tell you the solution now. I'm gonna tell you we now understand the problem, the core problem that is actually stopping you from getting the 700 level questions correct. Now, what is the solution to that? The solution to that is following the right method. And I'll actually show you the same question. I'll now solve the same question that I gave you using the method that I used today. Okay. And I'm going to read out loud when I'm doing that so that you're able to understand and relate. And I want you to focus on each and every part and ask yourself, did you focus on the question in the same level of depth as I'm doing when I'm solving this? And the right approach to solve a sentence correction question is following the meaning based approach. Okay. Now, I hear this a lot. A lot of people tell me that, okay, so I follow the meaning based approach. In fact, I speak to 4 to 5 students every day. More than 3 of them out of those 5 people tell me that I focus on meaning. But the moment I ask them to solve a question right in front of me, they actually do it just like I did earlier, just like I showed you earlier. That's the approach that they follow. They feel that meaning based approach is all about understanding the meaning. Yes, it is about understanding the meaning, but there is a method to the madness. You have to look at the right points. You don't have to get 80% of the meaning, you have to get 100% of the meaning, and you have to analyze everything in depth. Okay, so I've said a lot. Let's look at the approach. So let me read the sentence. Scientists have recently discovered. Okay, so I understand that the sentence talks about something, a discovery that is done by the scientists recently. So it should have been done in the past. Maybe I could probably get to know more about the discovery as I move forward. Scientists have recently discovered what could be the largest and oldest living organism on Earth. Okay, so I get to know about the discovery. The discovery is about the largest and oldest living organism on Earth. I see a comma after that, so maybe I'm going to know more about this largest and oldest living organism. Okay, and trust me, guys, I'm reading out aloud whatever I'm thinking as I process the information. Okay, so try to relate to that. A giant fungus. All right, so probably this giant fungus is this organism that the previous part of the sentence was talking about. Okay, so a giant fungus, that is that. Okay, so that relates to this giant fungus. So I know till now that the sentence is about a discovery of what could be the largest and oldest living organism on Earth, which is basically a giant fungus. Now I'm getting an additional information about this fungus. That is an interwoven filigree of mushrooms and root-like tentacles. So that gives me more information about how the fungus is made of. What is the fungus made of? It is interwoven filigree of mushrooms and root-like tentacles. So that is how the fungus is like, probably that's how a fungus looks. So I create a mental map of it in my mind. Spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago. Okay, now what is the spawn talking about? Let me think about it. So what is spawned by a single fertilized spore? So the only thing that it makes sense with is basically the fungus. So if you focus on logically, if you ask yourself from the meaning standpoint of the sentence, I'm talking about spawned by something, a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago. You relate back to this portion with this particular part, the oldest living organism. Okay, the sentence is talking about something that is the oldest living organism, and I'm talking in this sentence, I'm talking about this part of the sentence, I'm talking about something that was spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago. So if I relate the meaning, it will become very clear that the spawned is actually talking about the fungus itself. It is talking about the giant fungus itself. So spawned is telling us about the giant fungus, that the giant fungus was spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago and extending for more than 30 acres in the soil of a Michigan forest. Okay, so this extending is basically parallel with spawn. So this is also talking about the same fungus. Okay, now this is how you're supposed to read a sentence. But not just that. In our GMAT Viz course, we actually teach you something called uh, pause points. Okay, so I've actually covered some of the pause points here. For example, one of the pause points is verbs, one of the pause points is pronouns, and one of the pause points is contextual words, transition words or something. One of the pause points is connectors. These are basically conjunctions, whatever you want to write. Okay, so these are certain pause points where you need to pause and then you need to do some processing. Okay, again, I'm not going into a depth of it, but whenever we teach you to pause and do some processing, the very important role is played by words that look like verbs. We tell you that you have to pause at words that look like verbs and identify first whether they are actually verbs or not. Okay, so if you look at in this case, when I actually read the sentence and I come to this spawned part, okay, I understand that talks about a giant fungus, but at the same time, when I pause here, I would actually try to understand the role played by spawned. Okay, so there is a method that we teach to understand the role played by spawned, whether it is a verb or a modifier. So I'm gonna just quickly run through it because I don't have the entire time to explain that to you. But think of it this way, and I want you to answer this question. Tell me, is fungus doing the action of spawning? I'll just get you a poll here. Is the fungus doing the action of spawning? Quick yes, no here. Is the fungus doing the action of spawning, guys? Focus on the meaning. And tell me, is the fungus doing the action of spawning? Deepak, you can actually respond in the poll. That will be much better. Thank you for your response. Is the fungus doing the action of spawning, guys? Read the sentence. A giant fungus spawned by a single fertilized spore some 10,000 years ago. Okay, I see a lot of no's. Shivam says no. Tirendra says no. Shivam says no twice. That's good, Shivam. Nice. Okay. So you firmly believe in that no. Great. All right. So I see a good number of responses. Most of you believe that yes, the fungus is not doing the action of spawning. Okay. But some of you believe that the fungus is doing the action. So if you still believe that, focus on this word by. Okay. The fungus was spawned by something. It did not do the action of spawning. It was spawned by a single fertilized spore. Okay. So if the fungus is not doing the action of spawning, shouldn't we use fungus was spawned by? Okay. Fungus was spawned by. Shouldn't we be using that if I want to use the verb? Obviously, yes, right? If we want to use a verb form, if this was a verb form, that's something we teach in our course, in the GMATVerbal course, that if you see a verb like word, which is in the past form, this is basically the ED form of verb, you need to identify whether it is a verb or not. And this is how you can identify it. If the fungus is not doing the action of spawning, and if I wanted to denote an action, like if I wanted to denote this as a verb, I should have written fungus was spawned by. There should be a was before it, which is not present over here. So what is the role of spawned? Clearly, spawned is not a verb. Spawned is not a verb over here. Okay, it is actually a modifier, what we call as ED verbal modifiers. Okay, it is just giving me additional information about the fungus. Okay, it is just another modifier. Now, if I know that this is a modifier and I know that extending is parallel to spawned, then extending is also supposed to be a modifier. Okay, That is something which I can know from this. So extending is also supposed to be a modifier and not a verb at all. Okay, is that clear to all of you guys? Can you quickly tell me yes, no in the poll here? Is that clear to all of you? That extending should also be a modifier. I'm not saying whether it is correct or incorrect, but is that clear to you that extending should also be a modifier and not a verb? Okay, is that clear to you guys? That extending should also be a modifier and not a verb? We'll see whether it is right or wrong. But let's make sure that you're clear that it should be it should also be a modifier. Okay, so I see a good number of responses. I'll end the poll now. So almost 80% of you are clear with it, 20% of you are not. Please feel free to share your doubts if you have any in the chat here. I'll take it up, otherwise I'll ask Sunita to help. Rajdeep says extending shouldn't be a modifier, I believe. So Rajdeep, in the entire sentence, I believe is the problem. Okay, so tell me, why do you believe that it shouldn't be a modifier? That's very important, because unless you reason it out, you'll not be able to understand what's wrong with the idea. Okay, Tatva says every ed should be treated as a modifier and not a verb. No, Tatva, don't generalize. Again, that's another problem with SC. We try to generalize so many things. Don't generalize things. All I'm saying is, whenever you see a ed verbal, you have to understand whether it is a verb or a modifier. And there is a test that is required to understand that. And that is something which you have taught in GMAT ways. And I've shown you the shorter version of it. The simplest way to look at and understand whether an ed verb is a modifier or a verb is to do two things. First, check if there is an linking verb or aiding verb before the ed word. Okay, so for example, if you look at this sentence, spawned does not have a linking verb. There is no was, is, anything before it. Okay, if there is a aiding verb before the ed form of the verb, it is definitely a verb. Okay, but if there is no aiding verb, then you need to go to step 2. This is basically step 2 that I showed here. I'm not saying that if the ed verb is not, that there is no aiding verb present, was, is, or something, it will be a modifier. Then you need to do basically step 2 if there is no aiding verb, which is the case over here. The step that you need to do is ask whether the subject is the doer of the action. That is what we are asking here. Is fungus doing the action of spawning? And I want Amrita, you to focus here, Rajdeep also to focus on this part. Okay, so the action is not done by fungus. Okay, so Rajdeep, please focus here. You'll understand why I'm saying extending is a modifier. Try to focus here. So a giant fungus spawned by a fertilized spore. This spawned is basically not denoting an action. This is done by the fungus. It is an action done by the spore on the fungus. So whenever you see such a case, you will understand if the answer to this question, if the subject, this particular thing, is not the doer of the action, definitely this is not the verb. Okay, because the subject has to be the doer of the action which is there. So if in this case spawned is clearly not a verb, it is a modifier. Okay, and since spawned is a modifier and you have a and present that is connecting extending with spawned, you need to understand that extending has to be a modifier also. You cannot have a construction where you have a noun, a subject, okay, you have a modifier, you have a and that is connected with a verb. That doesn't make sense. Okay, Vaibhav, I think it should be clear now. Rajdeep, I think it should be clear now that why extending is a modifier. It just can't be a verb. Structurally speaking, it is not possible. Okay, I cannot have a noun and a modifier along with it, and there is this and is clearly telling me that these two things are in parallel. They are at the same level, right? I cannot have a modifier parallel with a verb. Doesn't make sense at all. Okay, I hope that is clear, guys. I have just explained that to you. Now, with that understanding clear with us, it becomes very, very easy that none of this makes sense. None of this makes sense. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense because all these are verb forms. Extends is a simple present tense. It extended is a simple present tense. Is extending is also it extended is the simple past with the subject. Is extending is a present continuous, but all of them are verbs. Clearly, I can eliminate them. Doesn't make sense. What about extended? Um, Again, if you look at extended, a giant fungus extended for more than 30 acres in the soil of a Michigan forest. This is also a verb form because extended is an action which is done by the fungus. It is a verb form, and it also, there's another problem that it tells me that this is something which was true in the past, not true in the present. Doesn't make sense either. The only option which makes sense here, the only modifier form here is extending. And for that, you have to think from the meaning standpoint. Okay. And some of you might say that, okay, spawned and extending are parallel. They are modifiers, so they both should be ed verbal modifiers. Not a problem, guys. GMAT allows you to have ed verbals parallel with ing verbals. Still the point, they are logically modifying the same entity. Okay, and this is the official question. You have the only underlined word, and this is the right answer. Okay, so what did you see as the difference in the approach here? What was the difference that you found? And I want to hear from you before I tell my analysis. I want to hear from you guys. What is the difference that you found? Ayushi saying how extending is the modifier form. So Ayushi, by default, again, this is something that we have taught in the very basic files in our course, in the very like first 5 hours that you spend on our portal. You will get to learn this. Any ing verbal which is not preceded by a aiding verb, if there is no aiding verb present before a ing verbal, it is always a modifier. For example, if I say that Ram is playing football, this is the ing verbal, okay, but it is preceded by a aiding verb. So this is a verb form. This is the entire thing. Ram, let's say I remove this. Ram playing football in the neighborhood was seen by his father or whatever. In this case, playing is not having a aiding verb in front of it. So playing is a verbal. It's a modifier, not a verb. Because a verb always needs to tell you the tense as well. Tense aspect, the timing also. The verb has two things. It tells you the action or state, and it also tells you the timing. So in this case, if there is no aiding verb, it doesn't tell you the timing. Okay, so that's why I know that extending is a modifier. Okay, that's why I just explained that. So I hope that is clear. Okay, so let's see what you guys say. What is the difference? I wanted to hear that from you. So when he says focusing on the meaning and the logic of the sentence, good. Uh, Amrita says, I thought the subject was the animal, and due to by the thought, the action is done by the animal. Okay, okay. Do participles modifiers have tenses? So Deepak, modifiers have no tenses as such. Raphael says, I guess before we couldn't understand the meaning correctly with the previous approach. With this approach, all thoughts change. Good point. I'm so happy to see that, Raphael and Vinny. Anyone else? What do you think is the difference, guys? See, the biggest difference that you need to understand in the current approach is I'm not going randomly. I'm not treating grammar and the sentence differently. See, the sentence has a meaning attached to it. What you need to understand here is why is GMAT testing you on SC? Are you going to be a grammarian? Not really, right? You're gonna be a future manager. You're gonna do an MBA. So why are they concerned with SC? They want you to communicate clearly. They want you to have the ability of communicating in a clear, unambiguous, logical manner. That's why GMAT is testing you on sentence correction. They want to see whether you can understand things logically or not. So most of the GMAT SC questions are gonna be meaning based. What I did was, in this approach, when I solved this question, I looked at the entire sentence as an entity, as having a logical meaning. I tried to break when I read. I paused at the relevant points. I understood whether a word is a verb or not, and I made sense of the entire information that was presented. And that's when I saw a significant difference in my performance, and I was able to get a 94 percentile on GMAT SC when I took the GMAT. And the reason was simple, that I now focus on the meaning. Okay. Okay. So I see another question. Amrita is asking, after the comma there is no subject and verb, so how does it be connected by the comma? So Amrita, again it's a different discussion altogether, but this particular part which you see over here, this is called a flexible modifier. You are probably treating it as a clause. It is a flexible modifier. This is another concept that you need to learn. Again, it's covered in depth in GMAT course. But what flexible modifiers are? Nothing but there is a noun entity which refers to some part of the sentence. So in this case, this giant fungus refers to this organism, and the rest of it is a modifier that modifies this noun entity. Okay, so this is a flexible modifier. It's not a clause, so don't worry about that. Okay, so great, guys. Tatwa has a question. Is it possible that in another situation this extending without helping verb could be a verb and not a modifier? No, Tatwa. As I said, ing verbals can only be a verb if there is a helping verb in front of it. Simply put. It becomes a little more complicated for ed verbals. You have to do a little more tests. Okay? So, great, guys. I hope this is clear. So now I'm gonna actually gonna talk about the application part. So what changed in my approach from my previous approach? What changed was, earlier there was no method to the madness. I was just looking at a question. I probably felt that splits is the approach, but splits was more of a shortcut. It was focused on saving time, but there was nothing around that. Nothing, no solid approach around it. But whenever I used to solve a quant question, there was always an approach. For example, if I ask you to solve these two linear equations, how will you go about solving it? And please tell me in the chat here, how will you solve this set of linear equations? And in the meantime, I'm going to answer Amrita's question. So Amrita, a giant fungus, from that part till the end, it's a flexible modifier. There is no need for a subject and a verb. You're probably considering it as a clause. That's why you are worried about the fanboys and everything. Okay, so don't worry about that. That's a flexible modifier. You need to read more about it. That you'll understand it then. And I'm not sharing it in depth. I've already done it once, but I'm not sharing it again because that's not the scope of the session, and I want to stick to the timing. So sorry for it. But if you want to know more about it, write to me. Um, Elimination method. Deepak says, Sam says the same. Yogi says the same. When he says multiply second equation by 2 so as to eliminate one variable. Yes, guys. So when I solve a quant question, probably for this question, I'll focus on 3 steps. I'll equate the coefficient of x by multiplying the second one by 2. Then I'll eliminate x to get the value of y, and then I substitute the value of y to get the value of x. So this is a method. This is a proper method that I follow for solving this question. And the moment I follow this method, I'll always get to the right answer. Okay. And there is no doubt that I can actually get to the wrong answer because I always follow method. So when I was, the old Piyush did not follow a methodical approach. For me, learning grammar rules was important. I understood what is a gerund, a participle, a past participle, present participle, but I did not look at as a sentence as a living entity. I did not look at the interactions between each part from the meaning standpoint. And I did not have any approach whatsoever. I was just reading. If I did not understand, I reread, and I was always moving back and forth between answer choices. The moment I changed my approach to a methodical approach where I actually started focusing on the meaning, things changed. Things changed for good. Okay. And that's what you need to do. You need to learn the right methodical approach to tackle the 700 level questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Sunita from here. We will be solving one CR question and we'll show you how you can use this application based skill on a CR question as well. And then we will move to RC. So we're going to cover all 3 aspects and then we'll move forward. Okay. So I'm stopping my screen share, ma'am. You can start sharing now.
Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, depending on where you are. Once again, a very warm welcome, guys. I was so engrossed in Piyush's explanation that I quite kind of forgot that I was also going to present something to you. So great understanding, Piyush. Thank you very much. In fact, let me just start sharing my screen. Just give me a moment, guys. Just a minute. Okay, so I'll just start sharing my screen. Hold on a second, guys. Um, I seem to have, just give me a moment. Okay, I think you guys can see my screen. So before you get on with this question, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to first go through this question and put in your polls, and then we are going to start off on our journey to see how we should solve critical reasoning questions. I'm sure a lot of you have been facing various kinds of pains when solving these questions. So I'm not going to talk too much about it right away. I'm going to leave you to do this question. Okay, so go ahead. Another 30 seconds to go, guys. Okay, I'm just going to go and count 5 before I end the poll, guys. So if you've got your answers ready with you, just put in the polls. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, here I end the poll. All right, so let me quickly look at the results before I proceed with how to solve this question best. So I've got 12% of you rooting for A, 10%, 16% of you rooting for B, 16% rooting for C, a good 37% of you rooting for D, and another 16% of you rooting for E. Now, often these polls don't paint the right picture for us. For example, let me ask you another thing. How many of y'all were 200% super confident that you were marking the right answer? Let me just ask you on this poll. I just put this poll here. So don't worry, just give me the yes and no. Okay, how many of you all were super confident of the answer? And that's very important for me to know, for me to understand. So what I get on the polls is all of you, that is, I mean, everybody marked from A to E, okay? And kind of almost everybody says that they were super confident. Oh no, so I can see that the polls are changing, guys. So another 5 seconds. Listen to your heart. Ask your heart, were you really confident? Or did you go with the choice that sounded the best to you? Because that's what we don't want you doing on the actual exam. And today we are going to learn some very important lessons, some very important things that we actually do on the exam and which lead us to that lower scores. So 62%, I'm going to end the poll now. 60% of you were confident and 40% of you say that you were not really confident. Okay, so what is it that really causes us to kind of just go through spend time over the stimulus and then go through the choices and then kind of just mark a choice without really being confident about it? What is it that does not let us be confident? So I'm going to talk about how to solve this. I'm also going to talk about a very big pain point, pre-thinking. So for those of you for whom pre-thinking is a big problem, just hold on to your hats and wait. Now, one of the things that we stress on, as Piyush was also explaining for the SC questions, the approach is always to understand the meaning. Now, in this case, to understand the stimulus, okay, what the stimulus wants to convey, it's very important. And it is also important to understand what the question stem asks us to do, and at the same time, it is also important to understand what the answer choices mean. And we very often forget to do that. So I want you guys to follow closely how I am analyzing the stimulus, guys. Okay, all of you ready? I want you guys to. So I'm just going to start a poll very quickly. Are you ready to see how the stimulus should be analyzed, guys? Just follow me closely. Hold on to your questions. Okay. I'll be very glad to answer them once I am through with the process, because the process matters. So the first step, so very good to know, all of you are excited. The first process is to go through the stimulus very carefully and establish what the stimulus says. So I'm just going to start with my analysis. Okay. And here goes. All right. So I want to read the first sentence. Okay. Last year, so we're talking about the last year, all refuse collected by Shelbyville City Services was incinerated. All right. So you would and you would notice, guys, sorry for interrupting this analysis, that I am going to read a lot like how Piyush was showing you how to read a sentence correction question. So that method remains the same. One of the reasons why we teach SC first before we get on to the CR in our modules. Okay. So this is the first sentence, and it's a premise. The sentence states a fact about what happened in Shelbyville last year. What happened? All the waste that was collected by the city services was incinerated or burnt. Now you might ask, ma'am, what if I don't know the meaning of incinerated? Don't worry. If the question requires you to know the meaning of incinerated to answer it correctly, GMAT will provide you with the context to understand the meaning. If the meaning does not impact your answering the question, the meaning won't be provided. So don't worry. If you don't know the meaning of incinerated, just tell yourself, okay, something was done to the refuse collected by the city services. Okay, let's read on. This incineration generated, that is produced, a large quantity of residual ash. Okay, all right. So here is the second premise. And this is telling us the result of burning all the waste. Okay, what was the result of burning a huge amount? Of burning the last year's waste. Okay, so we are told that a huge amount of ash was produced, and that remained behind. So residual ash. All in all, these two sentences are telling us about the outcome of an action that took place last year. The action and the outcome. So you have to form a picture in your mind about waste being burnt and a lot of ash being generated. Okay, great. Let's read further. In order to reduce the amount of residual ash, Shelbyville generates this year to half of last year's total. Now that's a long portion. And it starts with in order to. So clearly here we are talking about a particular objective. And the objective is to bring down the amount of residual ash Shelbyville generates this year to half of last year's total. So last year a certain amount of ash was produced, and the aim is to bring down that amount to half this year. And in order to do that, what has the city done? The city has revamped, that is, changed its collection. Collection of what? Obviously, here refuse collection. So the city has changed its refuse collection program. That's a long sentence. So let's see what we understand from this premise. Okay. This sentence presents a plan and a goal. Now, how do we know that there is a plan and a goal? And this is very important. Okay. This is very important. How do we know there is a plan and a goal? The words in order to usually indicate an aim, objective, or goal. Okay. So the goal here is, this year, the goal is to reduce the amount of ash generated by the burning of Shelbyville waste. And you have to paste this goal in your mind. All right. We are also told by how much this ash reduction is desired. The city services want to reduce the ash and bring it down to half the amount of ash produced last year. What does this mean? If last year the amount of ash produced was X, then this year the goal is to produce only half of X. Okay, so we are, see how we are understanding the stimulus, how we are making sure that our understanding of the stimulus is crystal clear. All right. So the city has planned to do something in order to achieve the goal. Now, what is that plan? We have identified the goal. The plan is to revamp or change the method of collecting waste. Great. All right. So we have a very clear understanding of what's happening here. Last year something happened. This year there is a certain plan and a goal. Great. Let's read the last sentence. It's a long sentence. This year, so now we are again talking about what is planned for this year. City services will separate for recycling. Okay. So they are going to, take out some things from the refuse for recycling. All right. So this year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse, enough waste to reduce the number of truckloads of refuse. So they are going to reduce how many trucks full of refuse will be sent to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What does this long sentence mean? Let's break it down. This is again a premise which is telling us what is planned for this year. Okay, this sentence gives us the details of the change in the collection method. So the city services will collect waste, then they will separate this waste into, then they will separate this waste into two parts. One part will be sent for burning and one part will be sent for recycling. Right? So the city services will remove the recyclable waste by such an amount that the amount that is to be finally sent for burning will be reduced. By how much will this reduction be? Okay. Now the stimulus talks about the reduction in the number of truckloads to be sent for burning. So the number of truckloads of waste to be sent for burning this year will be half the number of truckloads sent for burning last year. Clear? Now say if last year 100 truckloads of waste were sent for burning, then the idea is to send how many truckloads for burning this year? Clearly 50 truckloads. So very clearly what we can understand is the city services plan to separate the waste collected this year in such a manner as to reduce the number of truckfuls to be sent for burning to half of last year's number. Okay. Now, very interesting. Note that there is no conclusion given. Okay. Oftentimes, we mistake a sentence to be the conclusion, leading us to think in the wrong direction. So clearly here, we can see that each of the sentences is giving us a fact either about the last year or about the plan or the goal. There is no conclusion. There is no author's opinion here. All right. And in such cases, what we need to do is we need to go straight away to the question stem to look for direction. Okay. So before I proceed further, guys, let me ask you, is this understanding clear? Is this understanding clear? Is the understanding of the stimulus crystal clear for you?
Ma'am, you are using the wrong poll, I think.
Okay, yeah,
Can you hear me clearly?
yeah, I
So
think so. Okay.
sometimes, yeah.
All right, let me just make a poll here. Let me reset the poll. Just give me a moment, guys. Just tell me.
I'm start the poll. I'll
Yeah,
start the poll. Yeah. Sorry.
my bad, actually. So, guys, is the understanding of the stimulus crystal clear to you? Okay, great. Now, let me reset this poll again and ask you the question in a slightly different manner. Were you thinking like this? Were you thinking like this? Were you thinking like this? Did you guys have this kind of crystal clear understanding of the stimulus before you proceeded to look at the answer choices? And I want you to be very honest with yourself. Did you have this kind of crystal clear understanding? Okay, great. So I can see almost all of you had a crystal clear understanding, which means something did go wrong because we have such a different variety of answer choices being chosen. All right. So let me proceed further. As I said, since there is no conclusion given here, we have to identify what we are supposed to do, and we are going to go to the question step. Question stem says, which of the following is required for the revamped collection program to achieve its aim? If we really simplify this, the question stem is asking us to identify a choice which will be needed to ensure that the goal of the revamped collection program is met. So from the question stem, we can derive what the conclusion is. The conclusion is that the revamped collection program will be successful in achieving its goal. And what is its goal? The goal is that the revamped collection program will be successful in reducing the amount of residual ash generated this year to half of last year's amount. All right. So that's the conclusion. And what are we supposed to do with this conclusion? The answer choice has to be true. There is a required there in the question step. So that required indicates that the correct answer choice has to be true for the conclusion to be true, which means we are looking for an assumption behind the success of the revamped collection program. Okay. All right. Is that clear? So this is a very, very important step as well. If you do not identify what you're supposed to do, let's say, for example, this was an assumption question. And if you did not understand that clearly, you could have come up with a strengthener as the correct answer choice on an assumption question, which would be incorrect. So now that we have understood the stimulus clearly, we will now move to the next step, and that is the pre-thinking step. Now, before I move to that, tell me again, very, very honestly, guys. Okay, let me bring up the poll because I kind of, yeah. So tell me, how many of y'all find it difficult to pre-think? And I want you to be very, very frank. How many of y'all find it very difficult to pre-think? So I'm going to address all your queries, Vaibhav, Uddhav. Just hold on to your hats, okay? Uddhav says, understanding was same, but process was not organized. I can understand that. And Uddhav, oftentimes that lack of organization costs us the question, all right? So we are going to come back to that. Let me look at the poll. Okay, so 83% of you say that you find pre-thinking difficult. Okay, now the poll has, so almost 80% of you say that pre-thinking is a pain. So I'm sure all of you would be interested to know, is there any other way of identifying the correct choice in case we are unable to pre-think in the limited amount of time? All right. How many of you all want to know? Yes? Okay, I'll just reset the poll quickly. How many of you all are eager to, are excited to know if there is another way of, getting the questions right in case you're not able to pre-think? How many of you all are excited to know that? Okay, all of you are. And believe me, this is so easy, so deceptively easy that sometimes people think, does it really work? It works, guys. And you can try it out today. All right. So first I'm going to show you, in case you're not able to pre-think, what you should do. And then I'm also going to show you how to pre-think on this question, both. Okay. So hold on to your guns. So we have already understood the stimulus. We have understood what we're supposed to do. And we have stepped into the pre-thinking space, and we are not able to pre-think. Now, a lot of times people think that pre-thinking is something that happens, outside of understanding the stimulus. It's not really like that. Part of your pre-thinking begins when you're reading the stimulus itself. So let's say you read the stimulus, you weren't really able to think, but you were able to identify the conclusion, right? Right? The conclusion is the revamped collection program will be successful in reducing the amount of residual ash generated this year to half of last year's amount. Now, in case you're not able to pre-think, the best thing to do is to set the scope of the argument. Now, you might ask, what is this? Scope of the argument is nothing but identifying the range within which the correct answer choice falls. Okay, any answer choice which falls out of this range can be eliminated successfully and safely. So how do we identify the scope of the argument? Nothing. It's very simple. Keeping the conclusion in mind, you tell yourself that the concern of the argument is the reduction of residual ash this year to half of last year's amount, right? That's the concern of the argument, correct? That's what the conclusion is all about. And if that is the conclusion, then any new information, because this is an assumption, that shows beyond a doubt, and that is because this is an assumption, that indeed the amount of residual ash generated this year will be half the amount of residual ash generated last year, will fall within the scope of the argument. Okay. So you have identified the conclusion, you're not able to pre-think, but you tell yourself, you literally articulate to yourself that I'm looking out for any new information that shows that residual ash will be reduced to half this year. Any choice which fails to do that is kind of out of scope. All right. I mean, in an answer choice, there might be new information, but if it does not impact the amount of residual ash generated this year, then that answer choice is going to be eliminated as out of scope. Okay. Thus, the scope is defined by the concern of the conclusion. And once you define the scope of the argument, it becomes very easy to eliminate the answer choice, even if you're not able to pre-think. All you need to remember is new information not impacting the concern of the conclusion means not within the scope and not the correct answer choice. Is this clear, guys? So let me ask you, let me just restart the poll. It's very simple. You're not able to pre-think. All you need to tell yourself is, I'm looking for this kind of answer choice. Is this clear? Does this make sense? Once you have this in place, you just take up an answer choice, all right? Place it against this scope and see whether that answer choice fulfills the requirements of this scope. If it does not, remove it. Again, take the next choice, put it against this scope, compare it. Does it fulfill my requirement of the scope? It doesn't, remove it. Okay. As Piyush said earlier, it's very important to not only select the correct answer, but to eliminate the incorrect answers on solid grounds of reasoning. So this is the scope of the argument, and this can be done for any kind of CR question types. All right. Next, I'm going to show you how to spot the logical gap in case we are giving time to pre-think. All right. So let's get started with that. Now, identifying the logical gap also requires us to be able to very clearly understand the stimulus. So pre-thinking can only be done if you have analyzed the stimulus carefully. Now, the stimulus told us very clearly that the number of truckloads of waste to be sent for burning this year will be reduced to half the number of truckloads that were sent last year for burning. So if last year 100 truckloads were sent for burning, this year the aim is to send only 50 truckloads for burning. All right, that much is clear. It's given to us. Okay, which in other words means if last year 100 truckloads generated, let's say X amount of ash, okay, so per truckload last year, the amount of ash generated was 100 by X. Each truck full of waste generated 100 by X. And that is how we got the ash generated last year. Okay, that is, so this is all given to us, all about what happened last year. But do we know how much ash will be generated by each truckful this year? We don't. Okay, that's the logical gap. We do not know that how much ash will be generated by each truckload this year. And that gap has been filled in with the assumption that this year the reduced truckloads of burnt waste will not produce more than half of X. Or in other words, if I simplify this further, a truckload of waste sent for burning this year will not produce more residual ash than that produced by a truckload of waste sent for burning last year. We can boil this down to even simpler words. Okay? The author is assuming that reduction in waste to half in terms of truckloads, okay, reducing the number of truckloads to half is going to be equal to reduction in residual ash to at least half. All right. Are you clear with this, guys, all of you? Let me just reset the poll and then you can fill in. Just give me a moment. There is a lag here, but there's a poll. So for all of you out there, are the two processes very clear? One, if you're not able to pre-think, and the other, if you're if you're pre-thinking. Is it absolutely clear? Makes sense to you? Can you see how your okay, let me ask you one more question. In fact, I'm so fond of asking questions, just so that I know you're on the same page as me. Okay, so let me bring the poll on first, and then I want you to listen carefully to my question. How many of y'all, all right, were thinking along totally different lines because you did not understand the stimulus carefully? How many of y'all were thinking along totally different lines because you did not read the stimulus carefully? Can you notice how useful and handy it is if you are following the right process? Okay, I've got 100% on that. All right, great. So I'm just going to now start with the answer choice elimination. So we are armed with two things, guys, here. One, the scope of the argument. Okay, we are armed with the scope of the argument, which tells us that we are looking for a choice which is going to show us that the ash generated this year is going to be half, or we are looking for a choice that is going to fill the logical gap as to how much ash will be generated by each truckload this year. Either ways, we should come up with the same answer choice. And now the next most important thing I'm going to discuss today is what to do if you are left with two close answer choices. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of lead you to this a little preemptively. When you are looking at, after you have eliminated the other choices which aren't that close, usually you're left with two close answer choices, right? Okay. Yes, let me ask this question. It happens to you in SC, so I'm sure it happens to you in CR as well. You're oftentimes confused between two answer choices. How many of you all are confused between two answer choices on a CR question? Okay, almost all of you. So tell me very quickly in the chat box, what do you do then? What do you do? If you're confused between two answer choices, what do you do? Let me see. What do you do if you are confused between two answer choices on the CR question? What do you do? I mean, what do you normally do? And I want you to give me an answer straight from the heart, guys. Okay, so Deepak says he reads the stimulus carefully again. I'm sure that's a very painful process, Deepak, time consuming too. Tattva says he chooses the most congruent one. So, which basically means he chooses the one which is the closest to whatever he was looking for and which may not be correct also. Rajdeep says here it is choice C and E. Yes, one of the closest choices. Deepak says negation test. Yes, Deepak, definitely you can try the negation test too. But sometimes if you have identified, let's say, the wrong choices, then that doesn't work also. So Uddhav says he reads again to try to eliminate, and we want to save time, Uddhav. Rajdeep says choose the one that makes a bit more sense now. That's exactly, I know, Rajdeep, what we do. And problem is, if we have not thought it out the right way, it's very difficult to understand what makes more sense. Winnie says pick one that's more relevant to the context. So remember, Winnie, the two choices are close because they both look relevant to the context, and that is why they're close. So today we are going to discuss about what to do if two choices are very close. So I want you to listen again very, very carefully. Thank you for being such a good audience so far. All right. So here goes the answer choice elimination stage. Here's choice A. And we've brought forward the conclusion and assumption for you to keep that in view. Choice A says this year, no materials that city services could separate for recycling will be incinerated. Now, what this choice really means is that the material that the city services separated for recycling this year will not be burnt. Now, does that have to be necessary? Does that have to be true for us to be able to draw the conclusion? Okay, we already know that the amount of waste to be sent for burning is to be reduced to half. Whether that amount contains some recyclable material or not does not make any difference. What will make a difference would be the amount of ash generated eventually. Now remember our scope of conclusion. Our scope of conclusion said that we are looking for a choice that will tell us that the residual ash will be reduced by half. Does this choice tell us that the residual ash this year will be reduced by half? Let me ask you this question. You can answer in the chat box. That'll be quicker, guys. Does this choice tell us, if we just place it next to our scope of conclusion, does this tell us that the residual ash will be reduced to half of last year's ash? Does this choice tell us about that? No, right? So Vinny says no, Deepak says no. What about the others? Does this choice tell us that the amount of ash produced will be less? No, Nilab also says no, it does not. So even if you have not been able to pre-think, or if you have not been able to identify the logical gap, you can clearly compare the answer choice to the scope of conclusion defined by you earlier and see that it does not fall within that scope. So Parini says no, Seema says no. Great to know from you guys. All right. So let's proceed further with analyzing this choice. Now, earlier someone was talking about the negation test. Okay. So let's say that A doesn't happen. All right. And some recyclable material could have been separated, that could have been separated for recycling, gets incinerated. Okay. This would be unfortunate, but it would not change the given information. We already know that city services will reduce the number of truckloads to half of last year's level. That reduction in truckloads will occur even if city services send some recyclable material to the incinerator. Okay, so thus this choice is out of scope and is not required for Shelbyville to achieve its aim. All right, and therefore it is not correct. So those of you who marked choice A as correct, my next question is addressed to those of you who marked this choice as correct. Are you clear why choice A is incorrect? Are you clear why choice A is incorrect, guys? You can answer. Okay, I'll just put up a poll. Just give me a moment. So those of you who marked choice A as correct, are you clear why choice A is incorrect? Great. All of you are clear. Now let's move to the next choice. Again, A was not very close. So let's look at B. What does B say? Separating recyclable materials from materials to be incinerated will cost Shelbyville less than half what it cost last year to dispose of the residual ash. Now, does the scope of the argument cover costs of the revamp program? Does it? No. We are not concerned with the cost of the program. We are trying to determine whether reducing the number of truckload by half will also reduce the amount of ash by half. Okay. So this choice is also out of scope. And again, you can see by defining the scope, you can eliminate some of the choices. And I'm sure those of you who chose B are clearly have already seen why B is incorrect. It's not about cost, guys. The aim of the program is to achieve reduction in ash. What it costs is not the point, not the concern of that. Let's move to choice C. A lot of you chose this choice, which is not the correct choice. Now let me see, let me talk to you about how. Refuse collected by city services will contain a larger proportion of recyclable materials this year than it did last year. What does this choice mean? This choice means that the total waste that the city services will collect will have more recyclable material this year than it did last year. All right. Now, this year, the recyclable material, a certain amount of recyclable material will be separated, right? And the total waste to be burnt will be reduced by half. So, whether the refuse contains a larger proportion of recyclable material compared to last year to this year doesn't make any difference. Okay, we don't care how much of refuse is collected or what proportion of that refuse is recyclable. Why don't we care about that? The proportion of waste to be recycled is not within the scope of the argument, since we already know that city services will cut the number of truckloads to half. Okay, this will happen regardless of whether this year's refuse contains a larger proportion of recyclable material or not. And even if recyclable material is high, then the incinerated material will be low. but it could still generate more ash per unit of refuse, right? Per truckload could still be more. So it is not mandatory for C to be true for the conclusion to be true, and that is why it is incorrect. Now I'll come back to this choice, guys. Okay, let's say that you had shortlisted this choice to be the correct choice. Okay, refuse collected by city services will contain a larger proportion of recyclable material. So what you would need to do when you would compare it to the other closest choice or closed choice, we will check out once more. Okay, I'll come back to this once more. So for now, understand why C is incorrect. Okay, choice D. The refuse incinerated this year will generate no more residual ash per truckload. Now, no more could mean the same or less, okay, per truckload incinerated than did the refuse incinerated last year. Clearly, what this choice is saying is that by reducing the amount of waste to be burnt by half the number of truckloads to the amount of last year's, the residual ash will also be reduced. Remember, the amount of ash per unit refuse, okay, if you remember what we had decided, the amount of ash per unit refuse is less than or equal to the amount of ash per unit last year. Therefore, the incinerator would generate less than or equal to the amount of residual ash produced last year. This has to be true for the conclusion to be true, and so is the correct answer choice. Moreover, even if you were not able to pre-think about this amount of ash, generated by per truckload thing, you had the scope of the conclusion, scope of the argument with you. What was the scope once again? The scope was that any new piece of information that will tell you that the amount of residual ash will be cut down by half. And this choice does that. So you can hold on to this choice. Okay. Anyways, this choice is correct, but we will come back to comparing this choice to the previous choice. All right. Let's move to choice E because a lot of you chose choice E too. The total quantity of refuse collected by Shelbyville City Services this year will be no greater, that means not more than, the total quantity of refuse collected last year. The total quantity of refuse collected is not the concern of the argument again. Okay? Once again, we don't care how much refuse is collected. The thing is the quantity of the refuse could be the same or greater, but the proportion of waste that is incinerated can still be less than what was there last year. Okay, since the number of trucks will be cut in half compared to last year. Since this does not impact the conclusion, this information is out of scope. All right, again, you can compare the scope here. The Shelbyville City Services could still achieve its aim without E being true, and therefore this is incorrect. All right. Now, what I will do, as I promised earlier, is I'm going to go back to the, I'm going to go back to the choices earlier, and I'm going to talk about what to do when we are looking at very close choices. Let me just quickly come to the screen where we have all the choices put together so that I can tell you what to do when you are kind of held up between choices which look close. But okay. Now, here, most of you were held between C, D, and E. Okay, let's say, so let's first compare C and D. Okay, let's say that you were able to eliminate A, B, and E, and you were confused between C and D. All right, the first step here is to first understand the difference. You can note this down if you want. If you are confused between two options, without going back and without going back to reread the whole thing, to pre-think the whole thing and thereby wasting time, okay, first understand what is the difference between C and D. So C is talking about the proportion of recyclable material this year and the proportion of recyclable material last year. Okay, D is talking about the amount of ash generated this year. All right, so that is the difference. Now go back to the stimulus and understand what was the conclusion. The conclusion was that the plan to reduce the residual ash will work. So will C be your correct answer or D? Now you can compare, now you can think. So first you identified the meaning difference between two close choices. Okay. Then you referred to the conclusion or the question stem of your stimulus to understand what you were supposed to do. And then you eliminated the choice which is out of scope of your argument, which is quite not telling you what you want. Is this clear, guys? Is this clear? Let me just end the poll and ask you guys. I'm going to show you this for E as well. So don't worry. Hold on to that thought. So Rajdeep is asking, how does D assure that the ash production is reduced to 50%? This might come down to 25% reduction. Remember what choice D is saying. No more residual ash per truckload incinerated than did the refuse incinerated last year. So if last year one truckload, let's say one truckload gave us 10 kilos of ash. Okay. So last year 100 truckloads were sent for being incinerated. Okay. So 100 truckloads and each truckload generated 10 kilos of ash. That comes to 1000 kilos of ash generated last year. So if this year, if the ash generated per truckload will not be more than 10 kilos, it will be the same as last year. So 50 into 10, anyways, you are reducing it by half, isn't it? Is that clear, Rajdeep? Is that clear, Rajdeep? So as I was going to ask you, I kind of I forgot. So a lot of you are saying, no, it's not clear how to differentiate between C and D. So I'm just going to quickly recap that and then ask you again. See, choice C is saying that the refuse collected will contain a larger proportion of recyclable materials this year than it did last year. Let's say last year, the proportion of recyclable material was, let's say, 20% of the total waste and 80% was to be burnt. This year, the recyclable material is, let's say, 10%. Okay. No, this year the recyclable material is, let's say, 30%, and the amount to be sent for burning is 70. But understand, does that matter? Because out of that 70 also, the number of truckloads will be reduced to last year's half. All right. And we do not know that the kind of waste that is being sent in those reduced number of truckloads is going to generate more ash or less ash. If it generates more ash, okay, so unless and until we know that how much ash is going to be generated by per truckload, it will not be clear to us. Our assumption criteria will not be met. So is it clear how to differentiate between two close choices? Is it clear, guys, how to differentiate between two close choices? First, you identify the difference without going back to the passage. Once you've identified what each of the choices mean, then apply your understanding of the stimulus to eliminate one of them. All right. Okay. Some of you are still not clear. So I will make this. Okay. I think 80% of you are clear. If you have more questions, you can put it in the chat box and I'll be glad to answer it. But just give me a moment to show you how to differentiate between E and D. All right. Let me see some questions here. So Yogi is asking, what if there is more truckloads of incinerated items collected than previous year? Yogi, how many truckloads are collected is not the issue. How many are finally going to be sent to be burnt is the issue, and that we already know. Clear? Is that clear, Yogi? Okay. So let's look at E once again. What does E say? Because E was also a very favorite choice. The total quantity of refuse collected by Shelbyville city services this year will be no greater than collected last year. Now again, what is D saying and what is E saying? So D is saying the refuse burnt this year will generate no more ash per truck than last year. E is saying total refuse collected will not be greater than last year. Now, if last year the total waste collected was 1000 tons, does it have to be true that this year also I have to collect 1,000 tons only. I can collect 2,000 tons, but I will reduce the number of truckloads to be sent to half. So any which way, the total quantity doesn't matter. So the whole purpose here is to understand what the two close choices mean. And believe me, guys, once you do this, you will no longer be confused. So what happens is when you're reading the choices for the first time, there is a sense of hurry. I can understand that. And at that point of time, you eliminate the ones which are absolutely irrelevant. What you're usually left with is choices that touch upon, that are relevant to the given stimulus or the conclusion. For example, in this case, C, D, and E. In one way or the other, they are relevant to the amount of, waste burnt, waste being burnt or waste being sent for recycling or waste collected. And that is why you shortlisted them. But once you are with these two or three choices, identify, don't just rush back to read the stimulus. Identify what these choices are saying. The point of difference. So see, the point of difference is proportion of recyclable material last year and this year. Doesn't matter. Okay. The point of difference between E and D is amount of ash generated and total refuse collected. Total refuse collected doesn't matter. And that is how you're going to eliminate the choices. Okay. So how was this process? Was this process helpful to you guys? Is it clear how to analyze the stimulus, pre-think, look at the scope of the argument, and compare the closest choices and eliminate them? Is the process clear to all of you? Great. That's so heartening to hear, guys. Let me look at your queries. So Vinny says, I had selected D at first, then changed my mind to C, mainly cause of the hurry. So Vinny, don't hurry. Keep a very calm mind, very clinical approach. Stimulus analysis, this much time. Okay. Choice analysis, this much time. Leave some time for eliminating one out of two closed choices. So don't hurry. Okay. So Rajdeep is saying the funda is the revamp program will be effective only when the refuse kept for incineration produces less ash compared to last year's outcome. Absolutely, Rajdeep. That's I could not have put it better myself. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to Piyush, and I hope you had fun doing this, guys. Thank you.
Oh, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a really elaborate discussion on pre-thinking, and I'm sure people would have understood what pre-thinking really means. Because when I speak to students, I hear that okay, pre-thinking is important. They say that okay, I try to do pre-thinking, but very few people actually understand how to pre-think. So it was so glad to see it in such a detailed overall process that we followed for pre-thinking, and I'm sure the entire group learned about it. So let's now move to the reading comprehension part, because we said that we are going to focus on SCCR and RC. Now, since RC itself is a big thing and we have almost spent about quarter to 2 hours right now, I'm gonna not take up a RC question, but I'm gonna tell you how RC is supposed to be approached upon. Okay, how you should approach RC. Now, the most popular approaches that I find people using generally is out of the three which I will show on your screen. The first thing is a lot of people say that you just read the first line and the last line of every para and jump to the questions. And once you see the question, you understand what the question is really testing you on, you come back to that relevant para and answer the question. The second approach, which I personally used as a student for a pretty long time, was to read the passage quickly within 2 minutes. Like just skim through the passage, take a mental note of what lies where, and refer back to the passage for every single question. That was something I used to do. Approach 3 is read the question first so you know what you're looking for. And trust me, these are the three most common approaches that I heard as a student myself, but sadly, none of them work on GMAT. I've wasted a lot of time on this because all these approaches, as I said earlier, also is just focus on one aspect, that is save time. Okay, but what it compromises on is accuracy. Now, what you need to understand in RC, the most common problem that people face in RC is they're confused about the meaning. Generally, if they're confused about the meaning of what they're reading, they need to refer back to the passage. And this rereading basically takes them extra time, and not just extra time, since they are under time pressure because they have to reread things, they read it fast again and they don't have any understanding even after that. So when they're marking the answers, they are low on confidence. They don't know whether the answer is the right answer or not. and which actually affects their performance. Now, the problem with all the three approaches that we talked about earlier is all of them focus on detail but not really on inference. But if you look at GMAT RC questions, about 85% of GMAT RC questions are inferential in nature. They will either ask you for the main point, inference, function, structure, application, all of which requires you to focus on what is written between the lines. So the most common question types that you see on your GMAT RC is, for example, which of the following is the author most likely to agree with? What is the function of the word Renaissance in the first paragraph? Which of the following is against the author's opinion, and so on. And the tricky thing with the 700 level RC questions is they don't really test you on local inference. So even if you go back to the relevant part of the passage, it is possible that the inference is not local to that particular part. It is actually global in nature. It relates to multiple parts in the same passage. And if you do not read the passage well, you do not understand the passage well, you will not be able to do well on the global inference kind of questions, which are the 700 level questions, incidentally. So the right way to do RC is you have to follow involved and evolved reading. You have to think like the author. You have to understand the author's point of view whenever you are reading something. You have to understand the, just read it passively, read it actively, break sentences into smaller chunks, derive the meaning of each sentence. For subsequent sentences, keep relating back to the previous sentence. As you read more sentences, relate back the information, see what the author is trying to do. Why is the author telling you what he's telling you? And for that, you can use transition words and conjunctions. They help you relate back the meaning. The idea is once you are able to do all of it, you will be able to come up with the summary of each para, which will actually take your learning to the next level, and you will be able to solve the questions really well. Okay. Now, these are the three approaches that you should follow for TR, SC, and RC. Okay. So the first and foremost step to tackle 700 level questions is you need to learn the right method. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you think that these methods are very time consuming? Tell me. How many of you think that these methods are very time consuming? And please be very honest with me over here. I still see a lot of people are responding to this poll still. Okay. Let's see a few more responses. Okay, guys. That's great. Kind of what I expected. Honestly, I have gotten 100% yes. All of you say that all these methods are so time consuming. We don't have that much time on GMAT. We just have 2 minutes per question. So guys, let me tell you something. This is about learning the method, learning the right approach. When you're learning something new, it is going to take you time. And that's why the next step is very critical. You need to master the approach. You need to analyze the solutions in depth to master the approach. I'm going to talk about that. See, learning the approach is just the first step. Mastering is something which will help you achieve the goal. That is something you need to understand and get right. When you're learning a new skill, whether it is playing a sport or driving a car, I still remember the day I actually started learning to how to drive a car. The first day I spent, it was so difficult for me. I had to think of the side mirrors, I have to think of the back mirror, I had to think of the steering, the car on my sides, what not, the gearboxes, accelerator, brakes, so many things were there. It was a tough time for me for to learn that. I felt that maybe okay, probably it's too difficult, so many things to remember. But now when I drive a car, it's so natural to me. I don't even have to think about what I'm doing. It's up in there in my subconscious mind. And that's your normal learning process. Whenever you learn a new method, you have seen us applying that method in depth today for the first time. For a lot of you would have seen it for the first time, some of you would have seen it earlier also. But you have to do it initially yourself on a good number of questions. When you start doing that, what happens is initially when you're learning, your conscious mind is doing everything. You're doing everything consciously. And your conscious mind is always very slow. But the moment you do it on a lot of questions, your subconscious mind will take over, and your subconscious mind is much faster. So it's very important for you to master the approach so that your subconscious mind takes over. Okay. And I'm going to show you how you can do that. I'm going to tell you the steps. So generally what people do is they think that practicing questions and taking mocks is what is going to help them improve. Okay. They have heard pre-thinking today. They'll just go and just start solving questions, and they'll think that, okay, pre-thinking is going to happen, because they know what pre-thinking is. But you don't learn from questions. You need to understand, you learn from the solutions. Okay, you learn pre-thinking today. If you solve a tons of questions using pre-thinking, in your mind you'll put all the effort which is required for pre-thinking, but are you actually doing pre-thinking right or wrong? Something you can't really understand unless you have a solution that refers to the same language. Okay. Now, what people do when they refer to solutions? Again, this is very important, guys. As I have a slide on this, because when people refer to solutions, what they do is there are certain mistakes that they do. One thing is they review the questions that they get wrong. If they get something right, they'll just move ahead. And trust me, it's something that I have also done as a student. Okay, I have also done that as a student, and I want you to tell me in yes or no whether you also do it or not. I have done that as a student, and I see a lot of people doing that. Please don't do it. Please review the solutions even for the questions that you get wrong. That's very, very critical, guys. That's very, very critical. Okay. Please make sure that you review the questions that you get wrong. Like, not just the questions that you get wrong, you also review the questions that you get right. That's very important, because unless you do that, you are never sure whether you get to the right answer because of the right reasons or not. The second mistake that people do is they spend time only on option analysis. They spend all their energy on seeing which option is right and which one is wrong. They hardly spend any time on the question statement analysis. And if you see in both the questions that we solved today, or the SC question or the CR question, we spend most of our time on the question stem, on the sentence and the passage, the argument that was there, because it's the question that the answer comes from. It's not from the options that the answer is coming from. That's something you have to understand. So you have to spend a lot of time on the question stem. Just working on option analysis and just looking at the wrong answers is not going to help you improve your score at all. Okay, so how can you master the approach? Let me come to that. So after you have solved a question, you need to refer to solutions which follow a consistent and logical method. The method has to be consistent. It should be the same method for every question, and it has to be logical. You should not refer to shortcuts, splits, skimming, all of it. You have to use the right methods: meaning based approach, pre-thinking, involved and involved reading. And this is very, very important, because unless you have this question methods in place, the solutions with these methods in place, you will not be able to draw a variance between your approach and the approach which is supposed to be taken. And unless you're able to draw that variance, that level of variance, you'll not be able to improve on your own. And you need to verify each question irrespective of whether you get it right, and spend 80% of your time reviewing the sentence, argument, or passage analysis. Not Don't jump to the options, don't jump to the errors directly. Do 80% of your effort on the analysis. And how you're supposed to do it is do it line by line, as I showed you earlier when I was solving the SC question, as ma'am was showing you earlier when she was doing the analysis of the argument. Read it, see whether you are actually able to do the same thing or not, whether you did the same thing or not. And if you did not do it, take a note of it so that you are able to do that on the next question. Okay, this is very important. Note down the variations, note down the variances, sorry, and make sure that you apply it on the next question. So if required initially, you might need to follow this approach on one question at a time. And remember, on GMAT, it is all about skill. It's not about accuracy. It's about getting hard questions right. So again, this is something which I show a lot of students, that even with 7 mistakes, people can get a 41. 8 mistakes can lead you to 30, and 9 mistakes can even lead you to verbal 21. Why I show this is simply put in simple terms: you should not just worry about getting questions right. You should get the hard questions right. And in order to get the hard questions right, you don't just need to know the approach. You need to master the approach, guys. Okay, and that's something which is very important for you to understand. If you are stuck in this 550 650 score range, there's a very, very high chance that you are doing very poorly on hard questions and not so good on the medium questions. And the only way you can actually go to 700 plus is when you have something like this. You're able to get all the easy and medium questions right and have a significant ability on the hard questions. So very quickly, let's now move to the strategy to score verbal 40. And I'm going to tell you how can you do that from where you are today. So if you're just starting your prep, you need to understand that there are 3 skills which are tested on verbal: comprehension skills, analytical skills, analytical reasoning skills, and focus on main point. Now, comprehension skills is only tested in SC only requires you to be good in comprehension. You need to understand the meaning of each sentence well. For CR, you need to be good in both comprehension skills and analytical reasoning skills. And for RC, you need to be good in all three of them. So if you're just starting your prep, it is important that you start with sentence correction, then move to critical reasoning, and then move to reading comprehension. That way, you will only need to focus on one area at a time, one skill at a time. Okay. However, if you have already prepared for some time, then what you should do is you should take a module wise test to actually identify your strong and weak areas. So take 70% as a benchmark, take a test of each for SC, CR, and RC. Anything above 70% is a strong area, anything below 70% is a weak area. So for example, let's say I take this test and I find these are my abilities today. Okay, these are the scores that I get today. Okay, so obviously SC is in my strong area, CR and RC are in my weak area. So if you're prepared already, what you need to do is you need to work on your weak areas first, and then you should work on your strong area. So the right order in this case is going to be CR followed by RC followed by SC. Okay, and how do you master each module? The first thing that you need to do is you need to first learn the right approach for that particular module. So I talked about, we covered the right approach for two modules today, SC and CR, and I talked about the right approach for RC as well. Please make sure that you first learn the right approach. In fact, at GMATViz, we make sure that we teach you the right approach before we teach you any particular topic in the entire course. That's something which is core for us. When we start sentence correction, we first teach you how to break any sentence into smaller chunks to get the meaning clear of every single sentence. When we start reading comprehension, we make sure that we teach you how to read any particular passage, what are the things that you should do while you're reading every particular passage. So first you need to learn the right approach for that particular module. Then you need to master the right approach on each topic of that particular module. Try to learn each topic from the approach standpoint. So if you're learning the meaning based approach and you are learning grammar rules just from a rule standpoint, it is not going to help. You need to also learn the grammar rules from the meaning standpoint. Understand the underlying meaning, understand the underlying logic behind it, then only you will be able to master the approach on each topic. And after that, you should take 4 or 5 sectional tests to fine tune your learning further for each topic. So what is the right learning curve for each topic? When I say a topic, I mean topics like verb tenses and so on. When most people follow this, like to go through modules or topics, what they generally do is they will learn the concepts and then they will just move to practicing questions. And they end up missing a very, very important step in between, which is learning the application, which is learning the right way of applying the approach. Now at GMATViz, we always follow these 3 steps. So every single topic, we start teaching you the concepts through video lessons. Then we teach you the application through a specially designed concept boosters where we use the same method to solve, give you all kind of questions that can come on GMAT from that particular topic. And we give you detailed solutions using the same methodology. And then we will give you practice quizzes to test your understanding. Okay. So that is a strategy to score a V40 plus on GMAT and score 700 plus. So feel free to let me know. We are now in the Q&A part of the session. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions. And I know a lot of you might have questions around your own strategy. And if you want to discuss that with me one-on-one, you can use this link to schedule a discussion with me. I've already shared that. You can always get in touch with me at piyush@gmatvest.com or on this number. But feel free to let me know if you have any